A few days ago, Paul had stood solemnly at the graveside of his beloved grandfather. The old man, who had once been his best friend and confidant, had passed away quietly in his sleep. They had spent countless hours together, walking through the woods near his grandfather's home, listening to tales of the past of struggles, triumphs, and lost family fortunes. But as time wore on and Paul had moved to the city for work, their bond had slowly begun to fade. Despite this, Paul had always felt a special connection to the house in the countryside, the very home where his grandfather had spent his entire life. Now, after the funeral, the house stood vacant and eerily quiet, like a forgotten relic of a time long past. Paul had no intention of moving back there, not with his modern life in the city. But instead of letting the house decay further, he decided to take on the task of renovating it before renting it out. The thought of it generating some income seemed practical enough, though something told him that leaving it empty would be a mistake. There was history in those walls, family history, and he felt it calling to him, even if he couldn't explain why. On his second day at the house, Paul found himself alone, surrounded by layers of dust and the faint smell of old wood. Armed with a rented demolition machine, he began removing the worn-out tiles from the floor in the living room, each tile a small piece of the past that had endured for decades. As the machine hummed and ground through the debris, something unexpected happened. The machine hit something solid, and with a sudden jolt, it came to a halt. Puzzled, Paul stepped back and examined the area. The floor beneath him seemed unnaturally hard, nothing like the crumbling foundation of the old house. He knelt down, clearing away the broken tiles with his hands. The faint glint of something caught his eye, buried beneath the layer of dust and grime. It was a coin, a very old coin. His heart raced as he gingerly picked it up, brushing off the dirt. The coin was unlike anything he had seen before, its surface tarnished, the design worn but still visible. It bore unfamiliar symbols, intricate and ancient. The dates on the edge were from the 19th century, but the style seemed older, more archaic, like something lost to time. Driven by a sense of curiosity, Paul continued to dig. As he carefully cleared away more debris, his hands brushed against something else's small, weathered box. It was metal, corroded in places, but still intact. With trembling fingers, he pried it open. Inside, there were more coins, stacked together, their designs even more foreign and mysterious than the first one. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of them, each one older and more worn than the last. Paul's mind raced. What was this? Why were these coins hidden beneath the floor of his grandfather's house? He had spent so much time with his grandfather, yet never once had the old man mentioned anything about a hidden treasure. His grandfather had spoken often of their family's struggles, the lean years when money was tight, the wars they had fought in, the hard work that had kept them going, but never had he mentioned anything like this. The more Paul thought about it, the more certain he became that these coins weren't just buried for safekeeping. They were a message, a secret. As he carefully examined the coins, something about the design struck him as familiar. The symbols, the patterns, they looked like something from his grandfather's old stories. His grandfather had often told him tales of a lost family fortune, of a time when their ancestors had been wealthy landowners, of a vault hidden deep beneath the house, filled with treasures passed down through generations. But Paul had always dismissed those stories as mere fantasy, part of his grandfather's colorful imagination. Could it be that those stories were true? Had his grandfather known about this hidden fortune all along and simply never shared it with him? Or had the old man discovered it too late, perhaps leaving these coins as a final clue to uncover a secret that had been buried for generations? Overwhelmed with a mixture of excitement and doubt, Paul decided to put his plans to rent the house on hold. He would not simply walk away from this discovery. This house, which had once seemed like nothing more than a place for him to occasionally visit, now felt like a portal to something far greater, something mysterious and long forgotten. With renewed determination, Paul began his own excavation of the house's past. He would search through old family records, letters, and diaries, anything that might provide a clue as to the origin of the coins. But as he delved deeper into the mystery, he started to uncover even more than he had bargained for. Hidden passages, strange markings on the walls, a diary written in his great-great-grandfather's hand detailing a secret society that had once operated in the shadows of their family. Each discovery led to another, each more perplexing than the last. It seemed as though his family's past had been intricately woven into a web of intrigue, conspiracy, and lost history. The coins were just the beginning, but there was a darker side to this legacy, too. As Paul grew closer to the truth, he began to notice strange occurrences, whispers in the house when no one was there, shadows moving in the corners of his vision, a sense of being watched. His grandfather's warnings about family secrets, about never digging too deep, began to take on a new meaning. Had his grandfather known about the dangers that lay buried beneath the house? Or had he, too, been consumed by the search for the truth? Paul's quest for answers would lead him into a world of hidden dangers, family betrayal, and long-buried secrets that threatened to rewrite everything he knew about his ancestors and himself. The old house was no longer just a place of memories. It was a key to something far greater, a journey that would take Paul deeper into his family's past than he could ever have imagined. The coins had been just the beginning, and now it was up to Paul to uncover the rest of the story, a story that might change the course of history itself. The more Paul uncovered, the more the house seemed to take on a life of its own. At first, he had thought the discovery of the coins was a simple case of forgotten family wealth. But as he dug deeper, the house began to feel like a maze. Every room, every corner, every creaking floorboard seemed to hold a piece of a larger puzzle, one that no one in the family had ever dared to solve. The diary he found in his great-great-grandfather's study was the key to understanding everything. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, the pages yellow with age, but the writing inside was clear, though difficult to decipher at times. His great-great-grandfather, Samuel O'Connor, had written it in fits of urgency. The entry spoke of a secret society known only as the Custodians, a shadowy group of influential families who had once held a considerable amount of power in the region. According to the diary, the Custodians were protectors of an ancient treasure, an artifact of immense power and value, said to be capable of altering the course of history. Samuel O'Connor had been one of the last to know of its existence, the treasure hidden somewhere within the very walls of the house Paul now called his own. But Samuel's writings grew increasingly erratic as he described the dangers of this treasure. It must never be found. One of the final entries read, "The world is not ready. The Custodians will do whatever it takes to keep it hidden, even if it means silencing those who seek it." Paul's heart pounded as he read these words. What had his great-great-grandfather known? And why had he hidden these clues, these warnings, buried deep within the house for future generations to discover? Determined to find out, Paul continued his investigation, following the cryptic clues his ancestor had left behind. One entry in particular stood out. The key lies beneath the hearthstone. Paul had always thought the old fireplace was just a relic of the past, a centerpiece for family gatherings. But now, it seemed as though it was much more an entrance to something hidden. He wasted no time. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Paul moved the furniture away from the grand hearth in the living room and started digging. The stones were heavy and worn, but after hours of work, he finally pried one loose, revealing a dark space beneath the fireplace. Inside, there was a small metal chest, rusted and nearly swallowed by the earth, its lock thick with age. With trembling hands, Paul tried to open it, but the lock resisted. It was unlike anything he had seen before, no ordinary padlock, but a mechanism that seemed to require a specific pattern to unlock. He remembered the coins and their strange designs. Perhaps they were more than just currency, they were part of the key. The next few days were a blur of research and trial and error. He pored over the family records, examining every coin, every letter, every piece of correspondence he could find. Slowly, it became clear that the coins were not just old relics, they were part of a code, each marking a different date, a different symbol representing a sequence of events in the O'Connor family's hidden history. One coin, for example, bore the symbol of a crescent moon and a star, and when Paul compared it to his great-great-grandfather's diary, he discovered that it coincided with a reference to an ancient lunar calendar used by the custodians. Another coin depicted an eagle with a key in its talons, which matched a passage in the diary describing a secretive ritual held by the group. Using the coins as a guide, Paul meticulously worked through the lock's mechanism, placing each coin in a specific order, one after another, aligning their symbols to the corresponding markings on the chest. Finally, with a sharp click, the chest opened. Inside, there was no treasure of jewels or gold as Paul had expected. Instead, he found a collection of old maps, faded and frayed at the edges, along with several carefully preserved documents, some in Latin, others in archaic English. But the most chilling item of all was a sealed letter, its wax seal unbroken for over a century. Paul's hands shook as he carefully unsealed the letter, his heart racing. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, and unmistakably from Samuel O'Connor himself. It read, "To my descendants, should you ever find this letter, know that you are walking the path of fate. The treasure of the custodians is not a mere object of wealth, but a source of unimaginable power. The artifact hidden within these walls can change the world, but it must never fall into the wrong hands. I have spent my life trying to destroy it, to keep it hidden, but it seems my efforts were in vain. I have made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure that it remains buried, but there are those who will stop at nothing to find it. Protect this house, protect the secret, and never speak of it again. I beg you, do not pursue this path, for the cost will be more than any of us can bear." The weight of the words hit Paul like a wave. The treasure his grandfather had spoken of, the one Paul had dismissed as a myth, was real and it was dangerous. It was no longer just a matter of uncovering a family secret, it was a matter of keeping that secret hidden or facing the terrifying consequences. As Paul pondered what to do next, the house seemed to grow colder. The strange occurrences he had noticed before, the whispers, the flickering lights, the shadowy figures at the edges of his vision became more pronounced. He could no longer dismiss them as figments of his imagination. Something or someone was watching him. And Paul had the sinking feeling that the custodians, or perhaps others with a far darker intent, were already aware of his discovery. He had uncovered a legacy of power, of sacrifice, and of danger. But now that he knew the truth, Paul was faced with an impossible choice. Should he destroy the artifacts as his great-great-grandfather had tried to do? Or should he follow the path laid out before him, one that could lead to unimaginable power or unimaginable destruction? The house, once a simple place of memories, had become something far more. It was a battleground, a place where the past and the present collided. And Paul was no longer just a descendant of the O'Connor family. He was now the protector of its darkest secret. The days that followed Paul's discovery were filled with unease. The house, once quiet and forgotten, now seemed alive with a dark energy. The air was thick with tension, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Strange noises echoed through the halls at night, soft whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves, faint footsteps in the empty corridors, and a shadow that always seemed to move just out of sight. Despite the mounting fear, Paul couldn't bring himself to leave. The secret he had uncovered was far too important, and his curiosity drove him deeper into the mystery. But each new clue he uncovered only led to more questions. The letter from his great-great-grandfather had warned him to stay away from the artifact, to protect the house and its secret at all costs. Samuel O'Connor had spent years attempting to destroy the artifact, yet it was clear that some force had kept it hidden, protected, and guarded by those who had come before him. The custodians, the secret society his grandfather had belonged to, were not just a group of wealthy landowners, they were the keepers of a far greater power, one that had been hidden for centuries. Paul had read the letter over and over, trying to understand what his ancestor had meant when he said, "The cost will be more than any of us can bear. What was the price of uncovering this secret? Was it power or something darker? The chest he had found beneath the hard stone contained more than just maps and documents. There were also cryptic symbols, runes that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. His great-great-grandfather had written in his diary about the guardians who protected the treasure, people who had sworn to keep it hidden no matter the cost. He had mentioned something about the opening of the vault and the time of reckoning. Paul didn't know what it meant, but the urgency was clear. It was as if something was stirring, something long dormant, and he was dangerously close to awakening it. One evening, as Paul was poring over the maps in the study, he heard the faintest sound, the creak of a door opening. His heart leapt into his throat, and for a moment, he thought he was imagining it. But then the sound came again, closer this time, from the hallway just outside the study. Cautiously, Paul stood and moved toward the door, his breath shallow. He had already locked all the doors, and the house was supposed to be empty. "Hello," he called out into the darkness, his voice trembling. No answer, only silence. But something was there. Paul could feel it. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision. His mind raced. Was it the custodians? Had someone found him? Without thinking, he grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The light flickered as he moved down the narrow passage, illuminating old portraits of his ancestors that lined the walls. They seemed to watch him as he passed, their eyes heavy with unspoken words. As he neared the end of the hall, Paul saw something that made his blood run cold. A door that had always been locked, the one his grandfather had said never to open, was ajar. He had never dared to enter that room before, believing it to be filled with nothing more than old furniture and memories of a time long past. But now, it felt different. The air around the door was thick, charged, as if it was calling to him. With trembling hands, Paul pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was not what he expected. Instead of dust and cobwebs, the space was perfectly preserved, as though someone had been tending to it. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their contents covered in layers of silk cloth. In the center of the room was a large, ornate table, and on it, a single object, an ancient-looking book, its leather cover etched with symbols that were similar to the ones he had seen in his great-great-grandfather's diary. Paul's heart raced as he approached the table. The book seemed to hum with an energy that was both foreign and familiar. It was the key. It had to be. Without a second thought, Paul opened the book. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the writing was still legible in ancient language, one that seemed to be a mixture of Latin and Old English. As he flipped through the pages, he felt an overwhelming sensation, as though the book itself was alive, feeding him knowledge, urging him forward. The text spoke of the artifact, the heart of the custodian's power. It was said to be a relic of great power, forged long before their time, a gift from the gods that could control life and death itself. The artifact, hidden within the walls of the house, was tied to a prophecy. Only one who truly understood its power could unlock it. And it could only be activated at the right moment, when the stars aligned, and when the bloodline of the O'Connors reached its final heir. Paul was the last living descendant of his family. The bloodline had thinned over the years, and now it was him, the one who had uncovered the secret, the one who had unknowingly walked into the prophecy. But there was a cost. The book warned that once the artifact was unlocked, it would call upon its master. The power within would consume them, drawing them into a web of control and influence that could never be broken. The artifact could grant untold power, wealth, or immortality, but at the cost of one's soul. Paul's hands trembled as he read the final passage. The bearer of the artifact will be both savior and destroyer. Their soul will be bound to the artifact's will, and the world will change. But beware, for there are those who will seek to stop the awakening. The custodians will come, and they will not allow the artifact to fall into the wrong hands. Before Paul could absorb the full meaning of the words, a sudden crash from the hallway snapped him out of his trance. He spun around, flashlight in hand, only to find the room was no longer empty. Standing in the doorway was a figure, a man cloaked in shadows, his face hidden beneath the hood of his dark cloak. He was tall, his movements slow but deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. "I see you found it," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. "You've awakened the relic, but now you must face the consequences." The figure stepped into the room, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "You don't understand what you've done, Paul. You've unleashed something that will destroy everything. The custodians will come for you."